This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome to the latest, the freshest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I am your host, Vito Geronimo Chirco, along to my usual sidekick and partner in crime, that is the Doc from Doc and Jock, John Charles McElroon. John, how's it going?
Heard any good news lately regarding the Detroit Tigers?
Might be stemming from last Friday. If you really appreciate that kind of news that went down, that Brad Ausmus wouldn't have his contract extended beyond this season, Doc.
Unbelievable the way it went down. I mean, we're all just kind of waiting for the season to end. The Tigers, in the entire month of September, have won 4 games. They just now have been swept by the Minnesota Twins. They're playing, basically, they're playing out the string, trying to get to the offseason. And some unfortunate things have happened. Alex Wilson broke his fibula. The Tigers aren't playing a great brand of baseball. They're kind of limping to the finish line. So, news day happens on Friday. The Tigers call the media. They call us up and they say, "Hey, come down to Comerica Park. We got some news. We got some info." And what was weird about the whole scenario, Vito, was while Al Avila was delivering the news that Brad Ausmus would not be re-signed, Brad Ausmus is just going about his routine, just kind of going through BP, hanging out with the fellas, and then the news breaks, and he kind of strolls over and is like, "Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where I'm going to finish it out." And what did you make of how Brad Ausmus took it, where he kind of came out and said, "Look, even if Al had offered me another contract, I wouldn't have taken it"?
He took it in a matter-of-fact fashion, didn't he? And him saying that, is that a bunch of BS that he just spewed when he did say that last week to the media? Or is that his true thought process when he did find out?
Obviously, he kind of feels like the wool has been pulled right from under him. The rug has been pulled as well. He's upset that the team was basically sold out. And unfortunately, when you don't win, you know it's coming, but to experience it, oh my goodness, I can only imagine what it's like now going to Comerica Park. It's not even 3/4 full. It's really empty. Nothing's going on. You're going there to the ballpark each and every day with no chance of winning. You're getting your ass kicked. And it's one of those things where I don't think Brad Ausmus, and even in his thinking, would think that it would be like this. So after 4 years, it's been enough. And I'm really happy that Brad Ausmus is no longer going to be the manager. And what was so fascinating to me was the media around town was making it like, "Oh, it's no big deal. Whoever the manager is going to be, it's going to be a bunch of young talent." No, it's a huge deal who's the manager, because when you're shaping young talent, you got to have a guy that's going to be teaching them strong fundamentals. You need a guy that teaches accountability. You need a solid manager, especially when you got young talent, because imagine if Brad Ausmus was going to run this team for the next couple years with a bunch of young talent. You might have had 130 losses. You might have even hit some records, because I don't see what Brad Ausmus brings to the table, in all honesty. I mean, I know he's smart. I know he can run a clubhouse, but in terms of X's and O's, in-game stuff, the proper use of analytics, making proper decisions, I don't see where he made all that much progress in 4 years. And it just goes to show you that, hey, just because you sit at a microphone in a podcast studio doesn't mean you're definitely wrong. Me and Adam sat here 4 years ago.
Here we go. You bring this up every single week. I think that you said he should have been fired. Wasn't the right guy, right, when he was hired to be the manager in 2014. He wasn't the right guy, and I've heard about this many times.
Did you read our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast?
I think you tweeted that old tweet out, right?
I pulled up old tweets. I found a way to pull up a way you can. It's really interesting and fascinating. You can pull up a segment of time and find the tweets that you had just in that framework of time. And I looked what I said regarding Caldwell and Brad Ausmus, and I knew right away. I mean, it was obvious that not a lot of people, when the Tigers went out and hired Brad Ausmus, not a lot of people were really on board with that. But my comments were there. I said that I didn't feel like potentially he was going to have success with the Tigers. I called out that he might have success with another franchise, and that might even be a freezing cold take, because I don't know. I wasn't impressed with whatever Brad Ausmus brought to the table. And it's the end of the year, and by all accounts, it's the right thing to do.
he had to be a better in-game strategician, right? He never was good enough with strategy, in-game adjustments with his pitching staff, with the bullpen late in games. His lineup construction was faulty at times, and we've harped on that, this and that, all of the issues of Brad Ausmus for how many years, and he has finally gone, and what a sigh of relief. The best thing to happen to the Tigers in a long, long time, at least in this particular season. As Brad Ausmus, his days were numbered, and his fate, I think, was decided a while ago. And that's why I think in that week or so leading up to that decision made officially by the Tigers last Friday, Brad Ausmus was very matter of fact and was hinting to the media time and time again that his days were over as Tiger skipper. And the thing is, how many years too long was it for you from day one when he was hired? He wasn't the right guy. And a lot of people, or at least it was 50-50. It might have been split more 50-50 actually, Doc. And do you know why? People actually wanted to give Ausmus the benefit of the doubt, even though he had no managerial or coaching experience at the major league level. It was because of the fact that when you look at why he got the job, do you remember the reasoning? The big reasoning was that he was an analytical mind, a sabermetric mind, a manager of today that was a manager that would apply the analytical mindset and into his in-game strategy, into his lineup construction on a game-to-game basis. But guess what happened with Brad Ausmus? He fooled us. He duped us. He played all of us for fools, including the Tigers front office and organization as a whole. And it cost the Tigers dearly many times in 2014, in 2016, and honestly, he could have been fired easily after 2015, okay? Or midway through 2016. Or at the end of 2016. So he could have been fired so many times, and then he was let go at the end of 2017 when there was no chance for the Tigers to succeed under any manager. And that's why I came to bat a little bit for Brad Ausmus, surprisingly probably for many people that have listened to me harp upon all his mistakes in his big league managerial tenure. But this season, it was not his fault to a large extent, and you could look at it.
I'm playing something here.
You want to say, yes, this is good.
Something that just needs to be said. It's
absolutely goodbye to Brad Ausmus and all of his mistakes from the past. And the Tigers will be very bad the next 2 seasons at least. But I almost wanted to see Brad come and be the manager next year just to fail so miserably.
No, come on, Vito.
And maybe, hey, Jim Leland and other people have said, Peter Gammons tweeted out, said he's going to succeed somewhere else. And I don't think he will, actually. I think that is ludicrous from Peter Gammons, a very educated, well-renowned Major League Baseball writer and insider over the years. But I think he was mistaken in saying that very much about Brad Ausmus. But the one thing that Leland said about Ausmus that I kind of liked was that maybe he can teach some guys because he still can get down and play with the guys, can catch BP. And he can be that on the field teacher because he's still in shape and very young. In my opinion, big time in the prime of his years in his life. He's not an oldie but goodie. He's very much in the prime of his earthly life. Where he's in shape, he can still field with the guys, get down, squat down, catch BP. That was the only thing he really had going for him. And I guess it's either you take that stance that it doesn't matter, Doc, like many media members took that stance, or you take the stance that you are, that it's overly critical who the manager is now because you have to build up this young talent. But maybe he was the guy that could have coached up a little bit this young talent. I don't know. That's the only pro that you could have said maybe Brad Ausmus had going into a major rebuild, Doc.
Vito, I really enjoyed you kind of talking and giving your soliloquy over the song there. It's kind of nice. But everyone in town is ready for a change. But unfortunately, what the media did get right was whoever's next is going to be fired because they're going to lose a ton of games.
Yep, the next 2 years, definitely.
And unfortunately, it's out there. People know it. The next manager of the Tigers is going to be a stopgap. That's what it's going to be. And
that's why you should have kept Ausmus for another year because you're hiring somebody to get fired. So how unfair is that to a guy like Omar Vizquel who's deserving of the opportunity? Right? You got to look at it that way too. So you let, once again, Ausmus next year fail miserably. You fire him at the end of the 2018 campaign, and then you hire a skipper that you believe could lead the ship in the right direction into the playoffs
one
day.
name I'm going to eliminate because it doesn't seem like a positive fit is Ozzie Guillen. I don't think that name is, I think it's a popular name because of the fact he won a World Series, but you got to remember, the type of manager that's probably going to be hired might be the likes of a Don Kelly, might be a super young
Another young guy, and we just went through that.
But this guy, whoever's next, is going to be fired. That's why I don't see the likes of a Freddie Gonzalez coming here. That's been bantied about, but I go to myself, I go, why would you take a job like Atlanta, really work your way up through a great organization, then come make a lateral move to the Tigers, who are rebuilding? So Omar Vizquel might be that guy. But Vito, how much notion do you give to the thoughts that the next manager has to be a foreign-speaking manager to relate to this next wave of athletes for the Detroit Tigers? Because it's been put out there, and the narrative has started to make the rounds that the manager might need to speak a foreign language to relate to some of these players.
Well, how about Vizquel, a man of Venezuelan descent, who appeases to a lot of the players inside the clubhouse, supposedly. So if that's a word on the street and it's true, Doc, then I think Omar Vizquel deserves a chance to not succeed right away. He's not going to, I get that, but to prove his worth as a big league skipper that can coach up this young talent.
Okay. Is there a name that you immediately cross off besides Ozzie Guillen? Obviously, Freddie Gonzalez, I don't see being the next manager of the Tigers. Who are your candidates that you find to be right there at the top of the list?
Are you getting Freddie Gonzalez from Lynn Henning? His recent article, too. I did see he wrote an article about Freddie Gonzalez being a fit for the Tigers, and I haven't dove into it. I don't know what it entails, but for me, guys that I would write off the list right away, I don't know if you can write him right off the list, but Ozzie Guillen, the way in which he left the Marlins and his last managerial stint, I think he's done as a big league skipper. I don't care that he won in 05 with the White Sox. He is done, okay? Now, as a bench coach, I would take Ozzie Guillen with his managerial tutelage he could provide to somebody young like an inexperienced Omar Vizquel. But guys that I would write off the list, Guillen, once again. Also, Gene Lamont, Lloyd McClendon, no doubters in terms of writing them off the list of candidates to succeed Brad Ausmus. Now, what's your opinion on those guys, those other internal candidates not named Omar Vizquel?
They'll definitely get interviews with Al Avila, obviously, to show them respect, but it's time for a change. And the notion that Brad Ausmus said was, and I think I agree, is that the Tigers need a new voice. They need a new guy giving the message. They need a renewed sense of hope. And a new manager will probably want to bring in his own guys. So I'm looking for potentially somebody maybe outside the organization, maybe a really solid analytics guy. So some people are really behind the Gabe Kapler bandwagon. And so that might be a guy that comes in here with a fresh start with some new ideas. But whoever comes has to have the ability to be patient. He has to have the ability to get his message across. And it's one of those things where it's going to be lean for a couple years. But I also had the thought that, hey, maybe with Omar Vizquel, we do catch lightning in a bottle. Maybe with everybody coming back healthy and you have an opportunity to see maybe some advancement from some starting pitchers, you could do a lot worse than Fulmer, Zimmerman, Boyd, and Norris if the bottom half of the rotation improves. I mean, Matt Boyd's come along in the last couple months. So if there's steady improvement and you bring up some younger talent that actually comes in and produces, now I'm not saying it's going to be a 90-win team, but I'm not sitting here guaranteeing that this team's going to lose 100 plus next year. They could be in the 70 to 75 win range next year. I could see that.
Yeah, I believe that. I think it's about who they go out and sign, if anybody. If they're going to be really cheap this offseason, then they're going to win less than 70 games maybe, or only 70. I would say 70 wins tops. They don't sign anybody at all in the offseason to upgrade their roster for next year.
Now, before we get to our guest, Tony Paul from the Detroit News, who do you want? Who do you want to be the manager of the Tigers?
I think Vizquel, and I think Tony Paul wants him as well. So a little teaser for Tony Paul and who he thinks will be the next Tigers manager in 2018. We'll get him on the line in just a second to discuss that very matter. And also about, hey, Vizquel. Now, the viability, right, of him as a candidate. How strong is it viable for him to be the next manager? All of that and more with Tony Paul next on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Doc, as you know, we have partnered up with the Detroit Sports Commission. And guess what, guys? Since 2001, the Detroit Sports Commission has applied its expert touch to marketing and to selling in the Metro Detroit area as a marquee destination for regional, national, and even international amateur sporting events. And through the Detroit Sports Commission's help, these events have attracted thousands of visitors and pumped millions of dollars into our local economy. It is why Detroit is now not only the place where champions are made, but also the place where championships are played. So to find out more about the Detroit Sports Commission and all of the events they're bringing to our region, follow the DSC on Twitter and on Instagram at DET Sports, and check out their website, DetroitSports.org. And now joining me on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company is Tony Paul of the Detroit News. Tony, how's it going?
Very good. How are you?
Very well myself, and good to have you on. We have to discuss to start off here, Brad Ausmus finding out, officially on Friday from the Tigers organization, it was announced that he would not be back after this season. And what was your initial reaction when you heard the news that he would not have his contract extended beyond this season?
I wasn't. I don't think like most people. I don't think I was terribly surprised. 4 years is a pretty good amount of time, and the Tigers are going into a transition period. They're not the star-studded team that they were when he took over. They're going to go through some growing pains here with the trades that they've made, with the young prospects they've acquired. Going into a new era. Their payroll's going way down. If you're going to do that, you probably want a new voice at the top. I thought there might be a chance he'd be back just because, you could look at it from the flip side saying, well, they're not going to be good for a little while anyway. Maybe it's time for him to continue to grow as a manager. But in the end, I think Avila thought what most of us thought, and that if you're going to do a rebuild and a transition and a complete teardown, then you probably want a new voice at the top. So not terribly surprised.
And Tony Paul, I'm with me here on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company as part of Vito's VIP line. And Ausmus's record going into Tuesday night's game at KC, by the way, 3-12 and 3-28. So with all of that being said, it'll be 4 years for him on the job at the end of this season. How should we remember Brad Ausmus as Tiger skipper?
Well, I don't think it's ever, I've read a lot of people write columns this week last week with different opinions and whatnot. And I just don't think it's going to be remembered as a very remarkable time in Tigers history. I mean, they made one playoff appearance. They got swept. They had a last place finish. They might be having a second last place finish. And then, he did a fine job, I think, last year, keeping a team that battled a lot of injuries, and a lot of adversity in contention. But in the end, 4 really unremarkable years when you consider that the previous nearly decade, Tigers made the playoffs 4 times, made the World Series twice, were one of the best teams in baseball during that span. So I don't think anyone's going to look back on it with any fondness, nor do I look back at anyone, nor do I think anyone's going to look back on it with any sort of, horror that it was just some awful 4 years either, just rather unremarkable.
Ausmus's first base coach, Omar Vizquel, recently has been discussed as a viable candidate for the Tigers' managerial job next year. What do you think about the viability of Vizquel as a Tigers managerial candidate?
Well, I think it's very viable. Omar Vizquel has been talked about for many years as a future manager. He's been a coach in LA. He's been a coach in Detroit. Very well respected, as a good baseball mind, good baseball pedigree. So I think that he's definitely, of the guys on staff currently, I think that he's probably going to be the leading guy to potentially take over. And some people say, well, it should be someone from outside the organization if you're going to do this complete rebuild. Well, there's that, but this is a young manager, and I think that sometimes young managers would be best with a rebuild. Even Ausmus admitted that maybe he would have been better suited for his first job to be a team like the one that's going to be inherited by the next Tiger manager, so that you can kind of grow together. So there's that argument to be made. He's also from Venezuela. There's a big Venezuelan contingent in that clubhouse, of course, and that can help maybe bridge some divide that may exist in that clubhouse. So of the guys on staff, I would certainly think that he would be the first person to be able to look at.
Tony Paul, I'm with me on Vito's VIP line. And Tony, honestly, I don't see any other viable internal candidates for the Tigers to hire to be the next manager. How about you?
No, I don't either. I guess McClendon maybe, but I don't think they'll go that route. He's already been passed over for the Tiger job once. I think you just need some fresh blood as far as, a leading voice. And Gene Lamont, I think, is probably too advanced in age to really want to deal with a young team like that anyway. Dave Clark, maybe. But I honestly, from my perspective, and I don't know how Avila looks at it, but from my perspective, I think Vizquel would be the only guy that I would consider on that staff.
And Tony, I believe that both you and I and a lot of Tigers fans right now see Vizquel as a viable leading candidate for the Tigers to hire to replace Ausmus. Now, outside of him, though, who are those viable external candidates that you could see replacing Ausmus?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of them, and I think that I think that certainly, as Lynn Henning wrote today, Freddie Gonzalez, who has overseen some rebuilding jobs with the Braves and the Marlins, could be another guy that speaks Spanish and English that might be considered. I think Manny Acta should be considered. Another guy who, with the Nationals, with the Indians, has overseen young clubs has the managerial experience. I think he should be considered. I think a guy like Gabe Kapler should be considered, although I'm not sure Kapler would want the job. He has a pretty good job in L.A. As the director of their, player development in Los Angeles with the Dodgers. He's also a close friend of Ausmus's, so I'm not sure that he'd feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. But I certainly think he should get a look. Dave Martinez is another guy, no managerial experience, but Joe Madden's right-hand man forever. And certainly is a guy that, thinks outside the box, has learned from one of the best managers in baseball over the last 20 years and deserves a shot to be a manager. So I think of those guys, I think would be interesting to consider that pool. And also if the Mets fire Terry Collins, which is expected, I think that Terry Collins could be a guy that Alavio may look at. A fiery guy, a well-respected guy in baseball, and a Michigan native too. So he might be a guy. I mean, he might be a little bit more older school than Avila is looking for, but certainly might be considered.
Do you think Ausmus ever gets another managerial job at the major league level?
Yeah, if he wants it, I suspect that he will. He is well regarded throughout baseball. It's got to be probably a fit for him. I don't think he's going to want to deal with a team that is on the decline that's trying to come back up, which is why I think that he was being totally honest when he said he wouldn't be interested in returning to manage the current state of the Tigers as the rebuilding process begins. But yeah, I do. You talk with other people throughout the game, and they like him. They think he's smart. I think he improved on the job. I think he will learn from this job. He's sticking with struggling veterans too long. I think is something he'll regret. Some bullpen management is something he'll regret. But a lot of great managers were very, very terrible in their first managerial go around. You look at Joe Torre, you look at a lot of guys. So I do. But then again, there's only 30 jobs. Every organization has a different philosophy, so it's tough to get one of those jobs. But I suspect that if he wants it and there's a fit, I think he'll be a manager again.
Looking at this last season managed by Ausmus for the Tigers, it's hard to pinpoint many positives collectively from this Tigers season. Now for you, since I'm going to ask you now here, what are the positives that we take out of this shipwreck of a season?
Well, I think that for starters, you've seen the maturation and I think the development of Nick Castellanos as a potentially game-changing hitter in the mold of what J.D. Martinez was and continues to be in Arizona. So I think you've seen that. I think that you've seen some young pitchers that have impressed. I think you've seen Matt Boyd take some steps. I think that's important. I think you've seen that Michael Fulmer is going to be a legitimate ace for a long time, as long as he stays healthy. And I think that you've seen, some young players, some young player infusion into this organization that's exciting. And it may not be as exciting on a daily basis in 2018, but the guys like Jacoby Jones and Mikey Matuk and Heimer Candelario, I think are guys that are going to be fun to watch for a while and fun to watch grow. And you're going to see, a team develop, its own players now. And, that could be exciting. So the young players in the organization are more promising than they've been in a long, long time. As fun as the run was from 2006 to 2013, and it was a blast to cover, to watch, if you're a fan, whatever. And they, it's not to say that they won't get to the point again where they're going to get free agents. So, once they start to get good again in a few years, 2-3 years, they will supplement the young players with some free agents, just like the Cubs did when, they got good. They finally went out and signed John Lester, John Lackey, put them over the top. I think you'll see the Tigers do that eventually. But it's going to be fun to watch this young stable of prospects grow, and especially the young pitching prospects they have in the system are no joke when you consider Matt Manning, Bo Burrows, Alex Faedo, their number 1 draft pick from this past year, who might not be that far away from the major league level. This goes a junior in college. He could be close. And then they have Kyle Funkhauser. They acquired Franklin Perez. There's a lot of young talent, and it's going to be fun to watch grow.
Now, Tony, I'm fascinated with your opinion regarding this last decade of Tigers baseball, because on the podcast, on our Twitter page, people are going back and forth in terms of how to properly categorize this last 10-year period. Some will say, look, it didn't culminate in a victory, so it's a failure. You know what? They tore it down too late. What's the proper way to put this last 10-year decade in proper context for those that are listening?
Well, first, I don't think they tore it down too late. I don't think this was like what the Pistons made the mistake of doing under Joe Dumars. I think they tore it down too late. And the rebuilding process for them was much longer and much more painful than I think the Tigers will be. The Tigers, they started tearing this down basically piece by piece in 2015 and got some great talent, young talent in return. So it's not like it just happened. It just started. So I would disagree with that. When you look at it overall, I mean, they didn't win a championship, and that's the ultimate goal. And when you don't reach your ultimate goal, then it's a disappointment. Failure is a very, very strong word. 2 World Series appearances. They certainly failed in those World Series with just the 1 victory to show for me. In World Series, they probably should have won. But 5 playoff appearances, a decade of contending, exciting baseball is something that the Tigers fan base has never seen before. A sustained period like that. So I would say that there were a lot of successes. There was a lot of fun. But in the end, you fell short. So it's a disappointment in that regard. Whether it's a total failure, I mean, everyone can have their opinion on that terminology. But I think that Tiger fans, as disappointed as they are that this team didn't win a World Series, a couple things. One, just remember this team from 1989 to 2005. I mean, where you had 16 years of just pathetic, awful baseball. And then you turn that around with a decade of good baseball. Well, if you look at it from that perspective, it was pretty fun. Also remember that baseball and what the Giants did, winning 3 in 5 years, 3 World Series, what the Yankees did with their dynasty in the 90s and early 2000s, that's really tough to do nowadays. It's a very difficult sport to win a championship. I believe it's the most difficult sport to win a championship because baseball, to me, is the one sport where any team can beat any team on any given day. I think in football, the better team usually wins. In hockey and basketball, I think over the longer course of the series, the better team usually wins. In baseball, it's a little bit different. So it's tough to win. But I certainly respect and understand fans' disappointment. But I think you also have to put in perspective, the 16 years before this sustained run was so bad that I think you have to look back on this era with a little bit of fondness anyway.
And Tony, speaking of that bad run, I didn't see a year of winning baseball in my lifetime, until 2006. So I saw a lot of crappy baseball, and obviously I wasn't that old of an individual at that point, but still, hard times as a fan. And in 2006, I mean, you saw them reach the World Series and bow out in the World Series, and maybe prematurely because it wasn't a great series, losing in 5 games. That was the only win of the times in which they made the World Series. And I agree with you, too, that they underachieved in 2006, even though the Cardinals, you could say, were overdue with Pujols, and maybe they should have won before when they had better regular season records. But I would say 2006, they kind of underachieved. In 2012, they definitely did, in my opinion. And then in 2013, losing to the Bo Sox in the ALCS, that was highly disappointing.
Well, that was the killer. 2013 was by far, I mean, make no mistake, was by far the best team of this era of Tigers baseball. And ironically, that was one of the teams that didn't make the World Series. But one bad pitch to David Ortiz changed the entire complexion of that series, changed the entire complexion of that postseason. I truly believe that Tigers team would have won the World Series if they won Game 2 in Boston. Joaquin Benoit, probably their best reliever in this decade of good baseball, made a bad pitch, and a younger Torrey Hunter might have caught that ball, but an older Torrey Hunter had no chance. So, 2013 was the team. As far as underachieving in 2006, they may have underachieved in the World Series, but that team grossly overachieved on a whole. It's funny, if 2006, everyone looks back on so fondly, and it was such an amazing, magical, out of nowhere run. And the home run by Maglio, and watching Placido Blanco run around the bases with that hoodie on. Just a lot of Joel Zamaya spraying champagne into the crowd. There were a lot of moments that we look back on with fondness. But if you look at that 2006 roster today, you would say, how in the hell did that team make the World Series? I mean, you got guys like Brandon Inge and Craig Monroe and, Todd Jones and Kenny Rogers. I mean, it wasn't like it was one superstar after another. They had a rookie breakout in Verlander. They had Maglio Ordonez, Pudge Rodriguez, and Carlos Guillen. Outside of that, it was a team of guys that had rather unremarkable careers. And, so if you look back on that roster in 25, 30 years, I think you'll really say, how the hell did that team make the World Series? So on a whole, I think they overachieved. In that one series of the Cardinals, they underachieved.
Absolutely. And that's what I meant to clarify, too, in that World Series. I didn't expect them to bow out on 5 games because you're right. I mean, they came out of nowhere, obviously, after 05 and how they finished, losing Trammell, firing him, and then going to Leland. Nobody expected that to happen. You're right, big time. And I think we have to appreciate what Leland was able to do with that team. A lot of under-the-radar players and young ball players that really weren't in their primes yet or never amounted to much after that season. And there was no true superstar, you could argue, too. No Miguel Cabrera in his prime on that team either.
Right. No, absolutely. I think Leland definitely changed the culture when he came over. One of the first things he did, by people that I've talked to in the organization, when he got there, he stood up at spring training and addressed the team. And, there had been some issues the previous year with Pudge Rodriguez and Alan Trammell. And, Pudge just, he kind of disrespected Trammell and it kind of came to a boiling point. And Trammell was a little timid in his response to that. One of the first things Leland did in spring training was he stood up in front of everybody and he says, there's one leader on this team, and that's me. And that's the way it's going to be. I'm in charge. I'm the boss. And he did the same thing at Pittsburgh with Barry Bonds. He had the respect, even if he didn't necessarily, get along with the players all the time, he had the respect of the players all the time. And then after that early series in Detroit, where they just mailed it in ahead of a West Coast road trip, Leland went off on him. I mean, before, everyone remembers the press conference clip where he went off and said this team was not ready to play. They were ready to pack up their bags and get on a plane to California. And that's not good enough here. What the fans didn't hear was before that press conference, with the media standing outside, Leland just ripping into that team with one expletive after another. He set the tone. He set the culture. And with a young team, for the most part, it responded. And they certainly responded after that, going on a big run, getting to, at one point that season, 40 games over 500. I remember 76 and 36 at one point. They responded to him. And for whatever reason, I don't think necessarily they responded the same way to Ausmus. But I think Ausmus took over a team that was on the decline. Leland took over a team that was on the rise. And I think that's one of the stark differences.
And what made 06 even more miraculous was the fact that in 03 they lost 119 games. So that's what makes 06 even more memorable as a whole. And got to let you go in a second, but before I let you go here, Tony Paul of the Detroit News on Vito's VIP line here on Tigers Talk. What is your World Series prediction?
Well, before I get to that, I just want to touch on what you just mentioned, how they went from 03 to 06. I was talking to Leland the other day when he was inducted in the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame. And he mentioned, Tiger fans are down. They're like, oh, we're not going to contend for another decade or whatever. He made the point that it doesn't take that long to turn a team around anymore. And he's right. And if you look at the 03 to 06 turnaround, that's remarkable. 119 losses to the World Series in just 3 years. And so I think Tiger fans should be a little bit more optimistic about how long this rebuild's going to take. The farm system is in as good a shape now as it's been in 30 years in Detroit. And it's only going to get better. They might make trades this offseason. They could trade Iglesias. They could trade Kinsler. So don't write the Tigers off too soon. I know my colleague Lynn Henning said it's going to take another 10 years before they contend again. I think they'll be contending or on the brink of contending by 2020, maybe 2021. As far as the World Series, I want to see Justin Verlander against Max Scherzer in Game 7. So give me the Astros and the Nationals with the Astros winning.
That would be beautiful to see. I think for me as a Tigers fan, too, that would be extremely beautiful. And for a lot of Tigers fans out there, definitely. And Tony Paul of the Detroit News, with that being said, thank you much for all the time on this week's edition of Tigers Talk.
All right, man. Thanks for having me anytime.
Yep, I'll talk to you. Doc, that was Tony Paul of the Detroit News, who joined me on Vito's VIP line this week. A lot of great anecdotes, insightful opinions shared by Tony Paul. And that's what we always expect when Tony's on the line with us. And Tony hasn't been on in a while, so it was great to have him on this week's episode of Tigers Talk. And he likes Scherzer against Verlander in Game 7 of the Fall Classic. How incredible would that be? And that would be a must-see game, already Game 7, but a ratings bonanza, too, for Major League Baseball, Doc.
That would be amazing. One thing, though, that I definitely want to highlight is amazing phone line from Tony, man. That's what you asked for, is that when you get a guest on, and if you're going to be a guest on a podcast, get yourself a great phone. He must have a Verizon phone. I'm wondering if it's AT&T or Verizon. It sounded crystal clear like he was right here with us. Wow, it was awesome. Good chat, Vito. The one thing I wanted to get and hear from Tony was his perspective on the last decade, because people have debated it, and I think he eloquently put it that prior to this last 10-year run, it was brutal baseball. The end result wasn't a World Series, but there is some positivity that we can take from it. And hey, at this point in time, you can debate whether the Tigers closed shop too early or too late, but in the end, this is where we're at with the Tigers, and it's going to be fascinating in the next coming weeks and months to see how this is rebuilt.
And the Tigers can be good quicker than people think. Tony Paul reiterated that point that I've shared on this podcast too. He said his colleague over there at the News, Lynn Henningsen, maybe 10 years from now, maybe they'll be good again. It'll be quicker than that. That's what Tony Paul said, and I totally agree with that.
If you've enjoyed what you've listened to, if you enjoy listening to the great guests on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, continue to support us. Help us put wind in our sails by visiting our website, DetroitSportsPodcast.com, and you could subscribe to this podcast and this network via all the platforms that you can find podcasts, whether it be iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, our website. Thank you for your continued support. Always enjoy talking Tigers baseball with you, Vito. Even though the Tiger season is winding down, lots to talk about. We'll be here each and every Wednesday, letting it rip.
We'll still be cooking. Absolutely, Doc. Adios.